Hey, Zach.
Hey, Patrick, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for agreeing to be the second profile for the share team. So let's start off with your full name.
Zachary Ryan Fruhling.
Ah, I didn't even know your middle name. And we've known each other for years.
It's funny. Sometimes I go by Zachary, and I used to go exclusively by Zach. All of my family knows me as Zach. Friends know me as Zach. When I started teaching, I started going by Zachary, maybe to make myself sound older or more sophisticated than I really was at the time. And professionally, it kind of stuck, where a lot of people call me Zachary. But it's funny that you call me Zach because in the last few years, a lot of people have called me Zachary.
Uh, what where did you get your education? Like the whole thing?
It's a long story because there were so many parts to it. So I went to high school in Vacaville, California, which is my hometown, multi-generational hometown. I went to a community college, Solano Community College, for 2.5 years. Got an associate's degree there. Then I transferred to Sonoma State University and got a bachelor's degree in philosophy. I lived on campus for one semester, but really didn't enjoy living with other people in that way. So I commuted from Vacaville to Sonoma State, got a bachelor's degree. Then I decided to apply for grad school, and it's kind of an interesting story. I was dating someone at the time, a musician who was living in Tennessee and moving to New York. So when I applied to grad school, I had in mind that I would follow her to New York, and so I applied to all these grad schools in New York. And by the time I left for grad school, she and I had broken up, but I'd only applied to grad schools in New York. So I ended up going to Syracuse University for a year. And I was fresh out of college with a bachelor's degree. I didn't really know what grad school would be like. It was my first time away from home in any substantive sense, so it was a little overwhelming for me. And I wasn't really happy there, so I decided to come back to California and then reapplied to grad schools out here in California and ended up going to UC Santa Cruz. That was back in 2002, and I started at UC Santa Cruz, and I was a teaching assistant there and at Syracuse University. I got my master's degree in 2004, and I was trying to work on a PhD. I kind of got stuck in a feedback loop with my dissertation advisor. Really slow moving progress. So that brings me up to about 2008 when I got offered a job at a company called Applia as a content developer, writing and programming online homework assignments for logic and philosophy courses. And that's pretty much the breaking point where I decided I was done doing academics and I wasn't really gonna be able to finish my dissertation.
You're a man of many hobbies. Tell me about some of your hobbies.
I have some unusual hobbies. The one that really kind of stands out that most people go, wow, that's interesting. I don't know anything about that is that I'm a ham radio operator. I've been a licensed ham radio operator since I was 13 years old. So I don't feel old enough to have been a ham radio operator for almost 30 years, but I have been. And my dad is a ham radio operator, and so was my grandmother. So my grandmother got me into it when I was young as a way of kind of giving me something to do when I was staying at her house while my mother was busy working, and something we could do together. As part of that, I know Morse code. That's one of the unusual tidbits about me. In fact, if I'm ever in a coma, Patrick, you can show up at the hospital, tap Morse code in my forehead, and I'll probably snap out of it. It's that deeply ingrained in me. It's like a second language. Um, I really have my grandmother, that same grandmother, to thank for most of my hobbies. She got me playing piano. She used to take me camping in Yosemite, so it's where I got my love of the outdoors and doing hiking and fishing, that kind of thing. I have a host of other little things I like to do. I like to bake. I find it relaxing. I've never been much of a sports person, but I used to. I've always kind of liked baseball. So there was a phase in life where I was hardcore in going to baseball games. Like I'd go to like 30 or 40 baseball games a year. And that was quite a few years ago now. But I kind of dabble in other hobbies, but those are the ones that really stick with. I do podcasts, as you know. I host two podcasts on the Trek.fm podcast network, one on Star Trek and philosophy, one on Star Trek Voyager. And podcasts for me started out, again, it was a way to kind of challenge myself. To see if I could make some great content and create the kind of environment I wanted to create, having the kind of conversations I wanted to have, and learn the things I needed to learn, like audio editing and the performance aspect of it and the production tasks. And uh, a lot of those hobbies, as I'm talking about it now, I realize are about a product. I like making things, and I like learning all the skills that it takes to make something and seeing it all come together into a finished product. So,
Who are some of your favorite writers?
so writers, it's hard to really say who my favorite writers are because there aren't that many books I go back to again and again. And they're not the things you might imagine. Like there was a novel I read a few years ago called Shadow Song. It was some obscure novel that wasn't very popular by this author named Terry Kay. I find myself rereading that again and again. It's this charming little love story that takes place in the Catskill Mountains in New York, and it's not about anything deep or important. I just found the story kind of touching and interesting, and I keep going back to it. One of my favorite book series since I was a teenager are the Anne of Green Gables books by Lucy Maud Montgomery. So, she's one of my favorite writers. Not for any deep reason, not very deep books, honestly, but I think, they shaped kind of who I am and how I view the world. And so I put them in the category of my favorite books. Philosophically, like I said, I used to teach philosophy, so it was hard to kind of whittle down, what I think of as my favorite philosophical writing. I enjoy the entire philosophical canon. All the things I would teach in a philosophy course. They're all important and they're all significant and they're all rereadable. And every time I go back to them, I get something new. Lately I've been interested in Henry David Thoreau. Just kind of the um, self-sustainability and self-reliance, and maybe even just a little bit of counterculture and a little bit of defiance in terms of what people's expectations are for what life is and what life could be. I find that really inspiring. As I get older, I find myself a little more preoccupied with questions about the meaning of life and questions about what to do in the face of the fact that we only have a limited amount of time on this planet, and what that means for the choices you make and how you want life to be. So these kind of existential questions that someone like Heidegger or Jean-Paul Sartre might ask. In terms of my philosophical thought, I was really probably shaped by one of my professors named Philip Clayton, who did a lot of work on the relationship between the natural sciences and religion, beyond the kind of creation evolution debate. These when they're kind of conflicting worldviews or worldviews that don't obviously match up, trying to reconcile them with each other in some constructive sense and give a coherent picture of the world and the nature of reality in general, when you have such obviously seemingly different worldviews. And so that kind of constructive thought I find really interesting. It's really kind of shaped how I think about philosophy overall. So in terms of poetry, I like a poet named Rod McEwen. I could have been a beat poet in the 60s in another lifetime. So, it's not the deepest poetry, but again, it's a little bit romantic and a little bit casual and a little bit informal, and, I'm more of a romantic sentimentalist than you might think, given the fact that I used to be a logic teacher.
What are your favorite qualities in a person or in a friend?
Like everyone, I think loyalty is important. It's no point having a friend who's not going to be a friend when it really matters, right? So that's really important to me. I tend to like creative people. You know, we live in an interesting creative world, and that creativity can take a bunch of different forms for different people. But I feel like some people just kind of get through the practical aspects of life. They go to work, they go home, they make dinner, they do whatever they do. And it's not very constructive. It's a very ordinary way of being. And I think one of the most important lessons I've learned is that you can make life kind of whatever you want it to be. If you have something, you have an idea, you can make it happen. If you have a way you want life to be, you can take some steps to make it happen. You can manifest things into reality, almost out of sheer willpower and a little hard work. So I like people that are working towards something, whatever that something is. In terms of friends, I think, one of the things that matters most to me, honestly, is standing by me when I don't feel like I deserve it.
If not yourself, who would you be?
The person that came to mind in filling out the questionnaire before our chat is Marcus Aurelius.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's an unusual answer, I think. I think he had an interesting blend of taking charge of his own environment, but still being humble and reflective and philosophical about things. He was introspective, learning the lessons of life and how to deal with all the practical matters, and all, whether they're personal, emotional things, or whether they were, invaders and knocking at Rome's door.
Thank you, Zach, for being our second profile in share.
Absolutely. These are interesting because there is no way that a 30-minute conversation can capture every aspect of everyone. But thanks for coming up with some interesting questions that get to the heart of who we are deep down inside in some way.